And I got off stage. I was super happy. I had a lot of guys come up to me like, "That's your first time. You did great." Blah blah blah. And I think I remember that moment. I always will remember when I see a first timer go up on stage and how they feel afterwards.
Yeah.
It's such a feeling.
It's such a rush. Yeah, it's such a
Yeah.
It's an incredible feeling.
Best rush I've ever felt, and I was hooked after that. I had to go back.
Yeah. Welcome back. This is season 2, episode 34 of Shooting the Breeze. And tonight my guest is Mike Leblanc.
Hey,
Mike is one of the few comics that I know who can do comedy in both official languages, which I think is super cool. Super cool. So welcome to the show, Mike.
thank you. Sorry, I had that second stream going and it messed with me. What do you mean? I got a double echo. It's weird. Okay, I've closed that off. We're live now. Okay. Yes, I'm one of the. I'm not one of the few. I guess in Ottawa, I'm one of the few comics that probably that speaks both French and English. That does comedy in both French and English. There's actually quite a few already. I can think of Julien Zion and Philip Brown, and those guys are fantastic comics. They're a lot more accomplished than I am on both sides. And even Rochelle Ellie as well too is a fantastic French and comedy. Julie Dugas also, I've also seen her do comedy in French and English. But it's definitely something I know in the upcoming year when things open back up. I'm going to put a focus on definitely on the French side of things. I've been thinking a lot about running a show, possibly on the Gatineau side, maybe, and calling it Fringlish, where we have both French and English comics who kind of come up on stage, and I'm starting to look at the possibility of that. I talk a lot about doing stuff, but we'll see how things work out in the new year. And that's definitely something that would be interesting. Yeah,
that would be cool because I know when I went to Montreal I think it was when I went in September, I did a show and it was a bilingual show.
Oh, really?
So there were like Anglophone comics and Francophone comics, and you just went up and you did your jokes in whatever language you wanted. I thought it was cool.
This was last September, like this recent September?
September 20.
Oh, it's 2020.
Yeah, a few months ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. 20. Yeah. Do you remember what spot that was at, or if you don't mind?
It was at Pub St. Paul in Old Montreal.
Yes, I've actually done that show.
Part of what's the name of I think it's Dirty Dozen or Dirty Four.
Yep.
They're a little group out of Montreal that runs all kinds of shows, and I think they're all like perfectly bilingual, or most of them are, so they can perform in both languages. And it's Joey Laflamme. Do you know him?
I do know of him.
Yeah, he's one of the organizers of that show, and I think Claudio Capri, and there's another guy whose name escapes me, but
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was at this pub St. Paul in Old Montreal. It was a lot of fun, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, so people went up, like, so the audience was mixed of Anglos and Francophones.
Yeah.
Bilingual people. Like I'm bilingual. I pride myself in being bilingual, but I know I can't do comedy. I know I can't do comedy, and I know like I would miss a lot of, like, I'm not that fluent. Like I would miss some of the nuances and play on words.
Yeah,
I would miss. Yeah,
I'm still learning that. So I know, like, I've done shows here in Gatineau, especially. There used to be a show up at Club Minotaur, which was in Hull, in the old Hull district, and they did a show for a while. It was called the Hope and Mike, and it was both French and English.
The Hope and Mike.
Yeah, I get it.
That's funny. That's cute.
So they had me on there initially as an English comic, and I went up there and had a blast. It was a really great venue, really good run show. And then I thought to myself, I'd love to try it in French. And so I think that's the first time I ever did it in French, was there. I had tried initially just to try to translate my existing sets into French and play around with that, and it didn't really work all that well. So I really had to I think I did the research. I started looking up all the French comics that I could find, all the stand-up comics that I knew were very successful, and started seeing what their style was. And I actually noticed there's a big difference in style in how I'm not going to judge French and English comic, but I find English comics on our side, there's a lot of dark humor, and there's a lot more of play on words or things like that that come from, I guess, the British style of comedy that eventually sort of get whittled down to American style comedy. But French comics, I find, are very similar to, say, Latin comics, where it's very expressive and it's all about how you say things and you try to relate to people. So, like, Quebec specifically has a very specific language in how they talk in joual, and they love to speak very in a slang term, and they like to say it very expressively but very quickly, and it's kind of like a machine gun fire of terms.
Okay.
And I find when you look at the style, it's that you look at, like, especially like Quebec radio, like François Pérusse, who's like a very staple character in French radio. He even talks, not necessarily talks, but he has actually his voice sped up in the radio comedy bits that he does, so they actually sound almost like chipmunky, and it's meant to be very fast and fast paced, and it's very expressive. And that's the style that he's in, and that, I think, a lot of Quebec since the 70s, 80s, 90s have all grown up on that really fast-paced, expressive style. And I've only ever seen that style in Latin comedy, for example. If you look at, like, true comedy from say Mexico, or from Venezuela, or Buenos Aires, they're very expressive, and they're very like, oh, like I'm not gonna do the accent, thank you, but
come on.
but yeah, no, but they're very expressive, and that's that. Their jokes rely a lot on the theatric of it, and Quebec comedy has a lot of that as well too. They don't have I don't think you'll ever see like a monotone Stephen Wright type of comedian in Quebec. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
I don't think people
that probably wouldn't
find
fly.
that palatable.
Probably wouldn't be enjoyable.
So again, so I really had to sort of acclimate myself to that. I had to acclimate myself to the culture of Quebec, but I'm not from Quebec. I'm French Canadian. I'm Franco-Ontarian, and my family's from New Brunswick. So we got both specters on both sides that are very, very different. Two very different Franco communities that are in the middle. You've got Quebec, who thinks that nobody's really francophone unless they're from Quebec, and then you got a large swath of people in Ontario, a very huge swath of people in New Brunswick who probably speak a sort of like a Newfoundland version of English, and to them in terms of French, and so exactly. So I have both those spectrums that are sort of siding against me. So so I fit kind of weirdly in that middle. And so when I went up on stage, I just kind of talked a bit about the Franco-Ontarian perspective of things, and I think a lot of them kind of identified, because Gatineau's very close to the Ontario border, so we can get away with it.
Right.
Didn't fly as well in Montreal. Didn't fly as well in Quebec. They didn't like me as much.
They're notoriously tough too.
They are, and
about everything, like hockey and everything.
Oh yeah, and they're not the least bit self-deprecating. They hate being self-deprecating. So, I totally get that.
Fast.
Learn fast. I got expressive all of a sudden, and that was my key to my success mostly. Slow it down, wait for pauses, and all that you need to do in French comedy. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I never even thought of like how the styles would be different. It never crossed my mind. But then now I'm thinking back of like the comics that I knew in, like, I grew up in Montreal, so the comics that were popular at the time were all like, say, like Michel Courtemanche was very expressive with his face and his voice and his body language, and it makes sense. It makes sense that but I never really thought about it.
Or Louis Joseph Wood, or all these guys who are all you watch some of those guys. I think the only comic that I've ever seen that doesn't really use that as a crutch often, especially, and he's a comic that does both French and English, is Mike Ward. We all know who Mike Ward is right now because of the recent case with Jérémy Gabriel and all that he's going through right now. But you see him perform, and he's very much an Anglo style comedian who's sort of really sort of teetered and adapted into the French style, which is it's just perfect. And I think that's really helping guys like myself, and even like guys like Julien Zion and all these guys who are really sort of getting into the American style comic to get into the Quebec market, which is kind of cool to see. Yeah.
So when you started doing comedy, you started doing it in English?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I initially started, it's been a while now. I'm going to say about 6 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I started in Vancouver.
In Vancouver.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was living in Vancouver at that time, going through what was a pre-midlife crisis. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to try something different in my life. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go through a stand-up comedy class. And I think you have a similar story as well too, Simone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went through a stand-up comedy class, and the teacher, I had two teachers who were part of that class, a gentleman by the name of Adam Pateman and another by the name of Ivan Decker. And both those guys are very great comedians. They both had Comedy Now specials. I think Ivan Decker is, you definitely
that
hear
name. It's the name's very familiar. I know the name.
Yeah, Ivan Decker, you're going to hear about more and more nowadays. I think he's going to blast off when things open up again. He's a fantastic comedian and very harsh. And so I went through my comedy class, and I was surrounded by people who were in what I call bucket listers. They were there because they wanted to, I guess, just get the free stage time and just be said that they've done stand-up comedy once and never actually get into it or get into the scene. And so I said,
fine.
I'm fine with that too. Yeah, exactly. You know what?
Exactly.
All the bucket listers are supporting those guys running those stand-up comedy classes. Right. You know, like
exactly.
Perfect.
Keep it going.
Yeah, and I like all God love him. I know Pierre Bro very well, and when I've worked at the Absolute Comedy Club. Pierre would have his nights upstairs with his class, and it was really a fun night. It was really great to see the supportive crowds that were coming there to see their friends perform, and I loved it. I loved that energy, and I love seeing people really put themselves out there, you know. But you know, I wasn't into it for that. I was into it for really for the love and the passion of comedy. It wasn't really to try to prove anything and try to get one bucket. I really wanted to be a good comic. And I think Ivan kind of saw that, and he said, well, listen, he says, if anyone wants to come, I'm going to an actual open mic. So I know by the end of this class, you're supposed to do a big showcase at the end of the class. Because there's nothing better than just diving headfirst in the deep end and just really trying an open mic.
Yeah,
and I said,
doing
you know
it
what?
For real, it's true, because it's very different.
Yeah. So I said, you know what? I told Ivan, I said, nobody took him up on the offer because they were all nervous, but I said, you know what? I'll do it. I have an act. I'm ready to do at least 5 minutes to go up on stage and do a set for 5 minutes. I think I can do it. So I said, I'll go with you. And so I went, and I went to this place. It was a small pub in Vancouver. I think it was called the Crafty Comedy Corner. I think it was an open mic for all the open micers, and some of the pros would show up, including Ivan. So it was an interesting setup. And so I was nervous. I didn't know what to do. So I stood in the back and I just watched. Before I'd ever even done stand-up, I'd gone to a lot of open mic stand-up comedy shows, just kind of sat and observed and really understood what was what. This one was especially sort of like a really dark open mic. You know, I've been to some rough open mics, but this one was really rough.
Think you get stabbed or something.
So that night, I'll tell you exactly what happened that night. Some drama happened that night. Night, yeah, I go up, I put my name up, and a gentleman by the name of John Paul, I think his name was, or I don't remember his exact name, but he ran the show, and he said, "This is your first time?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'll put you up." So I went up on stage. I remember going up on stage. I remember being a deer in headlights and just hoping that I could get something. And I heard laughs in the back, and I was like, thank you for laughing, and we'll go forward with that. I was so nervous, like ridiculously nervous. And I remember going
being thrown to the wolves, you know.
Oh yeah. That is literally diving headfirst. Yeah. And I got off stage. I was super happy. I had a lot of guys come up to me like, "That's your first time, you did great, blah, blah, blah." And I think I remember that moment. I always will remember when I see a first timer go up on stage and how they feel afterwards. Yeah. It's such a feeling.
It's such a rush. Yeah. It's such a, it's an incredible feeling.
Best rush I've ever felt. And I was hooked after that. I had to go back.
Yeah.
And I remember later on in the night, I was like, well, I'm going to keep watching. And there was a comic by the name of Mark Hughes, which we probably know now. He comes back to Ottawa pretty often. I've talked to him about this. Mark shows up on stage, and I think he was going through his phase of being really dark and really alienating the audience and doing whatever he was doing, which was fantastic. And it was really like next level, right? And I loved watching him. But there was a table of women who were next to the stage, and they just did not like him. They were heckling, they were throwing insults at everybody, including him. And he just decided he was going to make a point out of them. And I don't know what joke threw them off, but I do remember the words, fucking your grandmother through her colostomy hole.
Oh, Jesus.
And
wow.
So the next thing you know, I see a glass coming from the back of the room. It was like one of those, an actual like you know those really thick bottomed tumbler glasses that you would drink whiskey out of.
Exactly. It's a tumbler.
That got whipped at Mark, and it hit him in the head, and he dropped to the ground. And then that whole table of women just got up and ran. So the comedy producer.
Did they throw it? They
threw it. Oh yeah.
Oh shit.
And so the guy who ran the show, as I remember it, ran after them. The bartender ran after them because they hadn't paid their bill. And
so they assaulted someone and they're running out on their bill.
Yes, they assaulted the comic, and then they fucked off and they ran out.
Grand larceny and attempted murder.
Yeah. The whole room is filled with comics, and we're all wondering what the fuck, and we're all trying to deal with Mark, who's who's sort of all dizzy and shit, and things were going
bleeding weird. Probably
he wasn't bleeding, but he was just really like stunned, and he was yelling, like he was like, "That's assault!" And I totally got.
Oh, that's right.
Oh yeah,
true. Shit.
And so all that goes on, and then finally things sort of like deflate, like they eventually figure things out or whatever, and then the show kind of just ends at that point. Unfortunately, because it would have gone on for another hour had it not been for that. But anyhow, I ended up chatting away with the comics afterwards, and it was just this weird moment where it was like a camaraderie where we just realized, did this just fucking happen? Like,
what did I just witness?
Yeah, and then I tell them, this is my first night doing stand-up, and then they're like, oh, this is not how it is at all. Like, if you think this is like Roadhouse, this is not the case. And so that was a great, like, sort of introduction to comedy. My first ever up on stage, and I see a guy get knocked out. And I've talked to Mark about it since. Mark has since come back to Ottawa, and I chatted with him about it. And he's actually used that story on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and I remember I told him, I said, I was there, man. And he's like, oh my God. And he said, doesn't remember me from being in the audience. And it was just a weird moment. Just so different.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I've seen some weird shit, but I've never seen anything like that.
Oh,
I've never seen a comic get assaulted on stage.
No, that's the only time I've ever seen a comic get assaulted.
Wow.
I've seen them on YouTube videos and stuff like that. It seems like a pretty rare event. But I've seen some other weird stuff at open mics. Who the hell knows at this point, right?
Oh my God.
You've been through over 100, 200 open mics. Anything can happen.
You're going to see some stuff. You're going to see some things.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I've seen some weird things. I've been to open mics that will just rip your heart out in terms of just how depressing it can be. I've been to open mics in LA that would scare the hell out of, anybody.
Like scary how?
So yeah, I can think of a few times. So I went to LA for a few weeks, a couple times actually, just to get a sense of just escape Ottawa and just get out of my life and just sort of go out there and just experience life a bit. And I decided in LA, it's really interesting because, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but you can go to an open mic from 4 p.m. until 2 a.m. any night of the week.
Wow, it's like New York City.
Yeah. And I mean, New York is more compact. You can do the same thing in New York because it's very, very compact, and you can sort of get around Midtown or Brooklyn or fairly quickly. LA is a little more dispersed. So, like I was morely centered around sort of West Hollywood when I was staying there, but there's a whole other scene in North Hollywood. There's a whole other scene in East in every parts of it. So if you even go out to Silver Lake or, Koreatown, there's other scenes that are there. And so, but yeah, there's open mics everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, and I noticed like open mics are different. There are 3-minute sets minimum.
3.
Yeah, 3-minute
Wow.
sets usually. If you want anything beyond a 3-minute set, you're gonna have to pay for it. So there are pay to play open mics, if you can imagine. So there are places like a place called the Fourth Wall, which is really well known among a lot of comics, and you pay $5 for a 5-minute set or $10 for a 10-minute set, and you get to go up. And thankfully, because you pay, there are a couple of resident comics that are on in the back, and they'll give you tips afterwards. They'll actually tell you what you did wrong in your set, and they'll really sort of like grind you down a bit. So that's kind of what you pay for when you go there. But for the most part in LA, most of the open mics there are just comics. There's no audience.
Oh, really?
No.
Wow, that's very different than here.
Yeah.
Where and it's like a show. Yeah.
And it's disheartening because the majority of people who are going up on stage are a lot of times I've met YouTubers that I've seen it literally go viral in YouTube, and they went up on stage. They weren't funny stand up. I've seen one of I guess like aspiring actors who think that stand up comedy is like their next step up. Some guys who think that they're going to make quick money doing stand up. That is common, super common in LA. It's really interesting. But I met some really, really good people out there that I still keep in contact with today. And and really the only real reason I really went there was to do open mics and to be able to do open mics. I think I probably did about, in the 11 days I was there the first time, I probably did about 30 open mics.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So you're doing like a few every day, like a couple every day.
Easily. Yeah. I had a trick. So I had the whole lineup set up. So the weekdays in West Hollywood, the one that I love to go to was the first one of the day, was a 3 p.m. It was a 3 p.m. open mic at a cafe called the Venador Cafe, and it was run by a lady by the name of Liz Glazer. Fantastic comic. She's brilliant, and she's a really great person. And she would run that show. All you had to do was buy one thing at the cafe. So either I would buy a bubble tea and a sandwich. By that point, I was going to be eating anyway, so I just said I'll buy it. And then she'd give you 5 minutes, which was so rare. Wow. And I met a lot of cool people from that particular open mic. And that was a Monday to Friday, 3 p.m. show. But you had to be there at 2 in order to sign up. Okay. So the sooner you got there earlier, the sooner you could get into the sign-up sheet. And then I figured out not far from there were 2 other open mics that would happen back to back in that time. So the trick was to get there at 2, sign up, leave, go sign up for the other open mics, which started at 3:30 and at 4. And so you would end up sort of like staggering it. So you could do like you would show up at 2, the show would start at 3, you'd be on at about 3:15. And then by the time you got to the next open mic, you'd probably be up in the next 3 or 4 mics. And then boom, you go on to the next one and you'd be up in the next 3 or 4 mics. And that's the open mic scene.
Wow.
Yeah. And then
it's so different than here. I've only been exposed to it here, where it's like a show.
Yeah. And it was so different from my first night. The first night I ever showed up at the Comedy Store, I showed up at the Comedy Store. So I had no idea where I was going to go. I went to LA. I flew out there. I knew I was staying at an Airbnb in West Hollywood. And I knew I wanted to be sort of like within walking distance of the 3 clubs, the Comedy Store, the Hollywood Improv, and the Laugh Factory. Those are really very close to each other. Yeah, those are very close to each other. The Laugh Factory and the Comedy Store are both on the Sunset Strip. And then the Hollywood Improv is down on Melrose, which is just a little more south. But where I was literally smack dab in the middle in my Airbnb.
Okay, so you could walk.
Perfectly walk. But I didn't know where I wanted. So like when I landed, I left at 4 a.m. to go to LA from here in Ottawa. Landed there because of the time change. I ended up landing there at about 11 a.m. And then from 11
their time or 11
their time. Yeah.
Okay.
And so 11 their time, and then my Airbnb wasn't going to be ready till 3 p.m. So I'm at the airport, and I said, well, I don't know where to go. I can't go to my Airbnb. It's not going to be ready. So I said, just drive me to the Comedy Store. I said, I'll see what it is. I'll walk around. I'll walk up and down Sunset and just see what it looks like and see, where things are. And I needed that centralized sort of point.
Yeah.
So I took a cab, or I guess a Uber, over to the Comedy Store. I showed up, and I walk out there and I look at the patio and I see there's a big patio, and I was like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden the door guy shows up, and I needed to use the bathroom. So I said, hey man, I'm just showing up. I'm here out of town. I'm waiting for my Airbnb. Can you let me use the bathroom? I really got to go. He's like, yeah, no problem. So he let me in. And he put me in the back. And then I said, I just need to hang out for like a couple hours. Can I just hang out in the patio? He's like, yeah, no problem. And a guy was super nice. His name's Ron, really great door guy. And I chatted with him up for a few hours. But I really, for a long time, when I just got there, I sat on that patio and I was just basically facing the Sunset Boulevard. And I'm looking around and I can see the names on the walls. I don't know if you've ever seen the Comedy Store on
yeah, where the signatures. Yeah.
Yeah. So all throughout the whole building around, there's hand signature names of anyone who's ever been a paid regular at the Comedy Store. And the names just astound you. Like, you'll be surprised. Some people you don't know, but for some names will point right out to you.
Yeah.
You'll see Richard Pryor. You'll see,
Oh, wow.
like George Carlin was always a regular there. And you're just like, wow, these are names of people who've absolutely stepped on that stage.
Legendary names. Yeah.
Incredible. And so I realized where I was. I just needed to breathe in this moment. I'm sitting on hollowed ground, right? As a comic, this is the place. Like this,
Yeah.
I don't know what this
Mecca to a comic.
Yeah. Yeah. And so and it's weird because you when you spend there during the day, and I'm sitting there for 2.5 hours. I sat there doing nothing, just sort of absorbing everything. I never felt that in my life. I'm ADD to the extreme, and I can't imagine sitting there for 2.5 hours. But I'm sitting there for 2.5 hours, and all you see is tour bus after tour bus of like tourists talking about the Comedy Store and how important it is, and Mitzi Shore, mother of Polly Shore, yeah. And then you can hear that speech, or you hear the same speech, and so you actually get to know who each of these guys are. But they're bringing tourists, and none of the tourists give a shit about where they are. They just see like, oh, whatever, and then let's move on to I guess Sylvester Stallone's house. I don't know, but
yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, I'm sort of absorbing it. And then finally I'm like, I got to come back here. Like this, I don't know what the other clubs are like, but this kind of feels really special. I feel like I would fit in right here. I felt like I was at home for some reason. It was this weird moment where I was like, I feel like I'm at home.
That's really intense too.
Yeah. And so I left, I went to my Airbnb, came back that evening, right off the bat. And I said, you know what, I'm going to just come hang out at the Comedy Store and see what's what. And so I made friends with a couple of the door guys. One of the door guys I liked, his name was Austin, great guy. And he found out I was a comic. And there's a weird policy at the Comedy Store where if you're from out of town, you're a comic and you're visiting and you kind of express that, you don't really have to pay to get in.
Okay.
Yeah. If you
they
really
let you come in and just like experience.
Kinda. So the trick is get to know the door guys. The door guys are the key to everything. The thing with
they can decide whether they're going to let you in or not. Yeah.
You have to audition to be a door guy at the Comedy Store. This is a stepping stone to comedy, right? Anybody who's a door guy at the Comedy Store is a comedian. Period.
Right, because I remember watching the special on Crave or so, and like everyone who works there is a comic. Yeah.
Yeah, Austin was in that. I thought it was super hilarious to see, these guys, people I know. So I was like, oh, cool. And so I got to know Austin. I said, dude, are you having lunch? Have you eaten yet? So, and I know these guys don't make much money. So I said, fuck it, I'm on vacation. Let's order food. Let's hang out. Tell me what's what. I kind of want to know, how life is for you and whatever. And I befriended him, and he introduced me to everybody in that area. Like all the comedy, all the door guys kind of got to know me. And so they knew I was only going to be in for a little bit. And she said, just let him in. And so the trick is, there are really 3 entrances to the Comedy Store. There's the main room entrance, which is facing the Sunset Boulevard. And then there's the original room entrance. And then there's the belly room entrance. And those are, if you don't know, the Comedy Store has 3 rooms. There's the belly room, the main room, and the original room. and each of them have their own entrance. But the belly room entrance, you have to kind of go through the patio, go around the corner near the parking lot, and then that's the belly room entrance. But it's also a weird back hallway that can also connect to the original room, and it can connect to the main room. So there's this weird hallway down the back that can interconnect all three of those rooms. And so if you're at that door and you hang out and you get to know everybody who's there, you can encounter anybody and have a conversation with anybody. That's where all the comics kind of hang out and smoke and sort of like chat. All the door guys kind of go there, and then it's also your entrance to get into any of the rooms there.
Any of the rooms, wow.
And as long as the room is not too busy, you can always get in and sit in the back and watch the original room. So I've got to see everyone from you know, who did I see that was great? Bill was there. I don't know, I'm blanking on names right now for some odd reason. Yeah, and I got to see I got to see a lot of big name comics go through there. Joe Rogan was always there that night. That week he was happened to be there. Kirk Fox was there. Great comics. I missed it by a week. I really wish I'd have gone there a week later, because I found out from some people that I knew that Dave Chappelle had come in. And he
died. I would have died.
And he overtook the original room. He shows up and he says, okay, nobody doesn't want to do any kind of sets at that point. He just takes over, and he did a 4.5 hour set.
4.5 hours?
Yeah. I was told afterwards, and I was like, wow, how does he even do that? Like, that's, I don't know. But he goes up and he's basically holds court for 4.5 hours.
Wow.
And then you'll have,
I'm sure it feels like it goes like that.
Oh, sure. I understand. Yeah. You just get cycled. So the three rooms are very different and unique. The belly room is where you're going to see a lot of the fringe shows. It's a much smaller room. You have to go upstairs, and you go in, and it's like through that hallway up to the stairs. And there's like a really weird. If you've ever seen Dave Chappelle's special, it's the one where he shows the two different rooms. I don't remember the name of that special.
I must have seen it. I've seen everything.
I think it had Bird in the name or something like that. But anyhow, one of them is filmed in a big studio, like a big theater, and the other one is filmed in a very small venue. That small venue is the belly room.
Oh, okay.
That is where Chappelle filmed that special. So that's a very sort of really intimate place, very small. But that's where a lot of the fringe shows are going to go. That's where you're going to see smaller venue shows, really sort of interesting stuff. The original room is a much larger, classic, low ceiling, seated circular table kind of room, and that one has more of a vibe. Mostly, it's going to be comics who are paid regulars or comics coming through, and they're going to do 15-minute sets. So generally, you go any time of the week, you're going to see a lineup of comics from start to finish, and it starts, I think, at 8 p.m. and it ends at 2 a.m.
Wow.
And it's just a cycle, like a huge lineup of comics who are going to come in. They're going to do their 15 minutes, and then they're going to introduce the next guy, and then introduce the next guy. And then it's just a constant cycle. So the lineup gets posted in the early morning, and then it just goes through. And then on Mondays, they have what's known as potluck, which is the open mic, I guess, as you call it. And you show up on a Monday, and you get to sign up on a sheet, and you may get picked, and you get a chance to do a 3-minute set.
On that same Monday, or like later in the week?
Just the Monday. You show up at 3 p.m. You sign up for the sheet. They sell beer on the patio, and you get to hang out, and you get to wait. And you'll find out at about 5 p.m. who's going up for potluck. And then and then at 6:30 they start potluck, and that means that there's going to be a rotation of, and it's always a scale of new comics all the way up to the most experienced comics. And closing out the show, you'll see the big name, like the 8-9 p.m. slot. You'll see Joe Rogan, and you'll see Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura and all those guys. And Joey Diaz will start going in later and later, and then you'll see it'll close out with Don Barris or Brian Holtzman, or one of those guys will close out the show from there. And you could sit in the back of that room from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m. for a $20 ticket and see anybody. It's an incredible experience. And then the main room is where you're going to see your true main showcase. That's a very large, high ceiling room. and it's very iconic. You'll see a lot of Richard Pryor filmed the special there. A lot of people filmed a lot of great specials in the main room. But it's definitely a showcase room. And there are like large tables and booths in the back, and it's really kind of cool. And that's where you're going to see your typical opener, middle, closer, and your big headliner,
like
closer.
Like a typical show.
Yeah.
You would see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's where you're going to see those guys. And I think I've been to a few of those shows where I've seen some interesting people, like maybe Dane Cook and Mark Maron, and all those guys were there. Really cool to see that, actually.
That sounds so amazing, so interesting, and like it's got like the folklore quality about it, that it's like this hallowed, like every comedian, every comic knows the Comedy Store and the history and all of this, but to be there and to just witness all of the happenings, like what an amazing experience.
Right. So like going back to when I first landed in LA and went to the Comedy Store as my central part, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go to my Airbnb. I'm going to come back. This is where I'm hanging out for the night. I come to find out when I got back about 5-6 p.m. they were doing a thing called the Best Set of the Night. It was a show. It was an open mic, effectively, at in the belly room. And the idea was that if you could sign your name, put your name into a bucket, and you might get picked. If you bought a beer, you would get you use your receipt, put your name on it, and you would get an extra entry into the bucket.
Oh, wow.
And that would mean that you would end up going, like, if you got called, you had 3 minutes to do on stage, and that's it. So I ended up putting my name in that Sunday, and the show started late. It was starting at 11 p.m. Pacific time.
Wow, that's the middle of the night.
Yeah. So, but I said, you know what? I'm here. I just arrived. I showed up here at 11 a.m. I'm here all day, and I got nothing else. So let's just sign up and see what happens. So I went there. I went to a bunch of shows, and then eventually ended up in the belly room when they started the Best Set of the Night. If you won Best Set of the Night, you actually got a guaranteed spot at Potluck the next day, which is on Monday. So it was kind of this weird sort of like contest kind of thing. So I said, you know what, it'll get me up on stage. Why not? Right? I can say whatever. And sure enough, I got picked. It was about 1 a.m. when I got picked. I got to go up on the belly room and perform and do my three minutes and not get a single laugh.
Oh no. Oh no.
It was a room filled with comics who were all tired. I was tired. By that point, I'd been up for 26 hours.
Wow.
So I was really tired.
You're
and
like,
I was
but
I did it. I was super happy. I said, you know what? I went up on stage and I went up on the belly room, and that's really cool. You know, like at least I can say I've performed at the Comedy Store. It was kind of,
sure.
You know, and that started off. And then from that point on, I think the rest of the time, I pretty much would either go to all the open mics during the day, and then end up at one of the clubs. I had tried going to the Hollywood Improv, and the Hollywood Improv you don't get special treatment when you show up, so you have to buy a ticket. They have an open mic bucket show that you can go to, but it's the Improv is different in that they have a very large showcase room that has like that brick face wall on the back that says Improv and that weird metal sign. I'm sure you've definitely seen that.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen
that. And then they have a smaller side stage called the Improv Lab. And that's where you're going to see, kind of like the belly room is to the Comedy Store. That's kind of where you're going to see smaller shows happening. And they do a lot of bucket open mics there as well too. And anybody could pop into that as well too. I think that week when I ended up doing the bucket show at the Improv, Dr. Ken Jeong was one of the guys that showed up randomly.
Oh, yes.
It was
The Hangover.
Yeah, exactly. Of Hangover fame and all that. And he was very nice. Not very good on stage, but he was trying new jokes. So, you know, whatever it is. I think not long after, he was doing his set in the actual big room at the Improv. So he was just trying out new stuff to see what it was like and kind of get warmed up. And I think maybe a month after that, his special on Netflix came out. So
I remember seeing his special.
Yeah.
And it was before I started comedy. And I remember I was like, It's like, he's probably a very good doctor.
He should have maybe stuck to doctoring and acting, but as a stand-up, he's okay. I'm not gonna talk shit about He's a lot more successful than I am, so I don't have much to say.
Yeah, same, same,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, and the improv, and then the laugh factor I really didn't like. I
No?
just, I didn't find it welcoming whatsoever. I felt like it was really just a shuttle you in, shuttle you out. They didn't care for comics. They just wanted tourists to come in and do comedy. And then there was nothing set up. Unless you're performing there and you're booked to be performing there, they don't give a crap that you're a comic and that you're going to see comedy. And their tickets were expensive, and there was no hangout there afterwards or nothing. It just wasn't the same. So
Oh, wow.
the Comedy Store really was where it was at. Like that
Wow.
is a beautiful place. Like, it was so interesting in the sense that, like, the patio is open. You can meet anybody, anyone. I've had conversations with, like, I'm not gonna brag, but there's a lot of people that I met and had chats with. Mark Maron being one of them that I thought
Wow.
was really cool. And he was really interesting. He was really cordial and nice. We ended up smoking cigars together. He's a really nice guy. And then we got interrupted in our conversation by Pete Davidson from SNL.
Wow.
And so I guess they had just filmed, I guess they had just recorded a podcast together. So Pete and him were just chatting for a second. So while he was chatting, this girl was next to me and we started chatting, and I had no clue who she was, but she's wearing a hat and she's really small, and I had no clue who she was.
Was it Ariana?
So months later, I'm at home and I'm looking and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, when is Pete Davidson going to show up on Mark Maron's podcast? So I start Googling Pete Davidson, and the first thing I see is news articles showing Pete Davidson and Ariana Grande. And I was like, oh, that's the girl I was talking to. And I have no idea who she is. I'm not into pop music or nothing. So I was like, oh, she's very nice. Like, I asked her how she's doing, I says, the coming in from New York and blah, blah, blah. I guess because I figured she was with Pete. So I was like, oh, whatever. You coming in, did you fly in from New York or whatever? And she's very nice, but definitely trying to keep a low key, but
She's probably relieved that you didn't recognize her too.
Oh yeah.
You're just talking to her like a normal person.
Yeah. Yes and no. I think the Comedy Store is weird in that way because there's a lot of fairly famous people that show up. And it's very frowned upon that you show up and say, hey, can I get a picture? Or,
Okay.
you don't do that. You'll get, you show up there and you're cool, and the door guy, like I said, the door guys know you, and you're not going to be there just to like, hey, I'm a big fan and blah, blah, blah. Can I get a picture? I want something from you.
Yeah.
You got to get the sense that when they show up there, they feel like they're at home and they don't want to be bothered while they're at home.
Right. They want to feel comfortable. Yeah.
So if you can show up there and just talk to someone, say famous or whatever, and just chat with them as if they're normal people, like, hey, how's it going, man? Good. Oh yeah, blah, blah, and just talk shit and whatever, talk sports or whatever. I don't know, weird stuff, and not feel like you're asking something of them, and you're not trying to posture and trying to put yourself out there. Most of the famous people I talk to, I gotta say famous, but like big name comedians that I thought were really interesting, really good, down to the earth people, right? Like Joe Rogan was very sweet to me when I chatted with him. And a lot of the other, I'm not trying to name drop here, but they're random people that you're going to meet that are really cool people. And as long as you're cool, they're not going to bother you, and they're not going to, and it's a quick way to get kicked out of that privilege that you have as a comic.
I can see that. I can see that because I could see that they don't want you fangirling all over somebody. Like it's like so-and-so just wants to sit, have a beer, and wait for their time to go up, or for their friends to come in, and then to have someone click.
Exactly.
What I mean?
Exactly.
Can you sign this, or I loved you? And yeah, that's for like time and place. It's not the right time, it's not the right place.
Yeah, and LA is interesting in the sense that you always get people who are very facetious and put forward, but they see famous people all the time, so for them it's not that big a deal to see a Joe Rogan. Like, I mean he's a lot bigger now, but considering his Spotify deal, but back then he wasn't as famous, I assume. So when people saw him, it was really just his dude bro guys, and they were whatever they were. And so you maybe got a few guys from the back who were in the audience saying, yo, Joe, and they would say some sort of line from his podcast, I assume, or whatever. And so he kind of avoided a lot of that, he didn't want to step into that because he knew he's kind of teetering on that weird fame level where people really kind of always want to get something from him. But once he found out that you were okay and you were kind of in the vicinity, you kind of got vetted. you could talk with him and he would just chat, and the same goes to Mark, like Mark Maron and Joey Diaz was a sweetheart. I got introduced to Joey and he was just absolute sweetheart to me. And he was talking about Canada. I was telling him I'd love for him to come up to Canada and he can't, because he's got a criminal record that prevents him.
Oh yeah, they won't let him in.
Yeah, they won't let him in. And I was like, oh, can't you get a pardon or something? Like, I just want to see you. I said, I told him, I said, honestly, there was like 3 people I wanted to see while I was coming down to LA, and that was you. It was Joey Diaz. I got to see him a few times late night, and possibly Bill Burr. And Bill Burr was one guy I got to see as well too. And
I love Bill Burr.
Yeah, that's so the Bill I was thinking of. I don't know why.
Okay, Bill Burr. Yeah, because I was like, yeah, I didn't want to tell you like in case it was a different Bill.
No, it was definitely Bill Burr.
I love Bill Burr.
Yeah, he was nice. He was okay. I thought the coolest thing when I saw him, when I met him, or like when I just saw him from a distance, I assume, is he's wearing this great jacket. That on the back of the logo, it's like one of those, like varsity type jackets.
Yeah.
And on the back it said Mohegan Airlines. And if you've ever watched the TV show F is for Family, which is the animated series he has on Netflix, that's the fictional airlines.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was so cool that someone from his production company or whatever decided, like, I'm going to make like a Mohegan Airlines jacket. And I'm bet you he's the only fucker who has that thing.
Probably, yeah.
It was so cool. I was just like, oh yeah. And yeah, it was just quite the experience. And I've been traveled for comedy before. LA, I have come back to LA a few times, and I've been to New York as well too, which I've had a great time in New York. Yeah, and I loved.
When were you there? Obviously not 2020.
No. I would say the summer of 2019 was when I was in New York.
Okay.
Yeah, and I went down there for an acquaintance of ours, my friend Josh Williams, who runs the One Man podcast, great guy. We've traveled to LA together, and he knows an acquaintance of ours who was a comedian named Paul Verzi. And Paul Verzi used to come to Ottawa all the time and perform at Absolute, and that's where he kind of really got his sort of like his legs. Sometimes he would love to travel and go on the road, and he loved coming to Ottawa because he liked the crowd and he loved how different it was from a lot of American audiences sometimes. Right. He said it was a very smart. Ottawa has a very smart comedy crowd, and they really pull. Like, it's really a great crowd, especially like at Yucks and Absolute. We have great crowds that show up. Mm-hmm. That's very rare in some places. And he says, my understanding, at least from my know at Absolute, Jason treated him well and would bring him in and, have him stay at the great condo that they have and all that stuff. And so Paul would come in, and so Josh and Paul got to know each other fairly well. I don't know Paul too well, but he has a podcast called The Verzi Effect, which is I guess a pretty popular podcast that he has. And so he was doing his first ever live recording of the podcast, and it was in one of the rooms at Gotham Comic Club in New York. So we decided we're going to go drive down and go see Paul and hang out and go on at the taping for this podcast. And maybe possibly, we were going to probably end up hanging out with Paul afterwards. And so he had a guest on his show, and it was a guy named Sal Vulcano. He's one of the actors in a TV show called Impractical Jokers, which I see you probably find on Netflix or whatever. Yeah. But Sal was his guest. I had no idea. I'd never watched Impractical Jokers before then, and I had no idea who this guy was. So I wasn't really impressed when I met him. But we got to hang out with Sal and go for pizza and with Paul, Sal, and all them. And we went to this place called Joe's Pizza, and we're not far from the Cellar. And as we're standing there, some other comics start coming in. Sam Morrill came in for some reason, and Giannis Papas came in. We're like, wow, these are like, and I realized later that the Cellar was right next door. And of course, since we're with Paul and Sal, they started chatting us up, and we sort of like got in contact saying we're, whatever. And then later that night, Paul and us, at that time, I think it was Simon, Celine, myself, Josh Williams, and Paul, we all went to a private cigar, like a weird cigar bar in New York. and we got to just hang out and chat. It was like probably one of the best like New York experiences I could have ever had. And when we were at Gotham, and we got to hang out at Gotham, we got introduced to the manager at Gotham, a great gentleman. He knew that we were friends with Paul Verzi, and we knew we were comedians from out of town, so he treated us like absolute gold.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so we asked if we could come back another night, and he says no problem. When you come back tomorrow night, and I will get you a chair, your own table, and I'll get you all set up. And so we thought we are just going to end up like with free tickets to the show. We get to see a show, but no, we ended up sitting at this private table off to the side that's meant for industry and comics.
Wow.
So the comedians who were coming into Gotham to perform that night, I thought that we were either headhunters,
like bigwigs or something.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we're just two like comics just sitting there watching the show, but they didn't know. So we had a lot of them would show
you're in
up
the booth.
We're in the booth. That's the booth that you sit the headhunters and whatever at. And so they would say hi to us, and so we had a few big name comics come in and chat with us, and they were super nice as well too. So I've had great experiences. I've loved the comedy scene, especially the Ottawa comedy scene has been fantastic to me. I think there's some great people, really strong comics. And it's been interesting to see people grow in the last sort of 6 years that I've been in it. And even working at the club has also really given me a great perspective of.
Right. Yeah. Cause you would see everything. Yeah. You'd see all kinds of, like say when things were open, you would see like the newbies from Pierre's course all the way up to veterans, which would be so incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting. And what I found the best thing about working at the club was I would work 2 nights or 3 nights for a weekend. So I'd be there a Friday, I would do like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, for example. And that same headliner would be that whole night. So usually it's the same headliner, and they oftentimes on Fridays and Saturdays will do an early and late show, and on particularly Saturdays they end up doing 3 shows. So they'll do one early show upstairs, sort of like a midline show downstairs, and then come back up and close up for the late show upstairs. That's how a lot of those headliners work. And I got to see headliners do their same sets over and over and over, and just you could see the magic of how that sauce is made, like how they would adjust things or how they would sort of, but their set, their jokes, it's still funny. But it's, some of the setups that they would set up where you would think, oh, they just came up with that on the fly, really was something that they've practiced, they've honed and crafted that in. I could think of one particular comic, David Acker, who's you probably know from the Comedy Nest. His set is really interesting because there's a moment where he breaks his mic stand and it drops, and then you feel like he's just making it up on the spot, like he's playing around with it or whatever, and until you see him do it 3 times in the night, and you're like, oh, I see your trick. Like you're pretending this is an accident and you're coming up with it on the fly, but you're not. You're a pro. And so
this is planned. This is rehearsed and practiced, and
it absolutely made me appreciate how these guys really craft their sets and like headliner level sets, and they can do 30 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour of great material in that time, and really sort of like pace it and slow down and interact with the crowd. And I've seen great comics who are not that. They're not that consistent. They are straight up crowd workers, guys who can show up, have sets, but regardless, there's going to be a portion of that will be completely impromptu, and they're going to come up with it on the fly through crowd work. And that's a whole other skill in itself, and it's one that I absolutely respect. I wish I could have the same. Oh yeah, I wish I could have that crowd work. I've talked to people who I know are great crowd workers and try to figure out what was their secret, and they tell me you're just having a conversation, like treat it like a regular conversation and see where it goes, and you're eventually going to find something funny. But as long as everyone's there to have fun, and it's an interesting skill. I wish I had it. I really did.
Me too. The extent of my crowd work is that's my crowd work. I know I'm not good at it, and I've never really practiced it that much, but Yeah, just talking about it, I'm like, ugh, I get all nervous, you know, because the people who can do it
Yeah.
well, can really
Oh yeah.
do it well.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, we have some local people here that are really good at it.
Fantastic.
You
We
know,
we
they're
have
fantastic.
probably some of the best crowd workers I've seen. Sometimes are often here. Some
Mhm.
notable ones. Josh Williams, again, a friend of mine, fantastic crowd worker.
Yeah, I worked
Uh,
with him in, I think it was October at
yeah,
Absolute in Kingston.
yeah.
Yeah, and
He's
he
he's
was good at crowd work. Yeah.
when he's on, he's on. I've seen
Mhm.
him literally hate his crowd. The crowd was, hostile, and nobody liked anybody that came up on stage. And he would get up there and work the crowd, and he would just win them over real quick. I've seen miracles from him before. Tavis is a fantastic crowd
Yes.
worker. I
Yeah.
have, I've seen great things from him too. And like those are guys that from out of town that I've seen travel. Maybe Brett Forte. Brett Forte to me is I've seen him kill, absolutely kill and level an audience completely from crowd work, and super witty. Like I've never seen someone have that kind of wit ever. Tyler Morrison as well too has been a guy who could just come up with witty remarks so quick. Is just yeah. So massive
Yeah.
respects to those guys for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's definitely a skill.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's an additional skill apart from being able to just get up there and do a set. You know, it's just this extra layer of skill attached to it.
I feel
You
like it's
know?
a confidence. It's a confidence when you set up on stage and no matter what's going to happen, you're going to engage with the people in the front. And I think there's a confidence in knowing that you're funny
Mm.
and knowing that inherently people are funny.
Yeah.
Like I know comics like you and I rely on our material, and we want our material to be a certain thing. And I've had to deal with hecklers before, and I'm not very good at it, but I do my best, right?
Me too. Same.
And I rely on my
I'd rather
material.
not, but
I rely on my material. I'm good with that, right? Like I know before I ever set up on stage, I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. I know how long it's going to take. Granted, COVID's really messed with my timing lately. Like I used to know when I sit up on stage that I knew I had 8 minutes, and I would literally get up on stage and it'd be like 7:55, and I knew exactly where I was at or whatever. COVID's kind of messed that up for me.
yeah,
I'm
it's
not gonna.
messed up our timing because it's not consistent. Like we're not
Oh,
performing consistently, and we lost that timing. Yeah,
yeah,
because I used to be able to like pull together a set. Like if I needed 7 minutes or 6 minutes, it's like boom, done. It's harder now.
Yeah.
Harder now.
Yeah, and I think also is with COVID is happened is the sets have gotten smaller in a lot of ways. Like we're doing more 6-minute sets, 8-minute sets to try to get as many people on stage or try to get people through. And I'm noticing like when COVID hit, I was on the cusp of really changing my material. I was getting rid of a lot of material, like a lot of material. And I even now, like after COVID hit, like when I got back on stage after the lockdown, I was doing all new stuff. Like I had thrown away all my material. I was like, I'm done with this. Like, so that's maybe where my gauge didn't happen. Like I had no idea how much I could really expand on this. And I was getting the laughs, but I remember once I had an 8-minute set, I ended up doing 14 minutes at Absolute, and they were so pissed at me, and they
they don't like that.
Oh no, they were lighting me. I couldn't see it because of the stupid glass.
The glass, it's like you can only see yourself.
I'm looking at myself perform. I feel like such a narcissist performing. But either way, like I lost complete track of like my timing and everything there. But again, you rely on your material, right? And I can imagine crowd work is one of those things where, if you're given the leeway or the freedom to do more, I would hope that you'd at least have 10 minutes, because if you only have 6 minutes, no one's doing crowd work.
You can't. That's a lot of, you don't have enough time really.
So,
6 minutes is just like get up there with your material and go. You don't have a lot of leeway to interact with the crowd that much.
Now think back. Now think back to LA when I was doing 3-minute sets and even 1-minute sets.
1-minute sets. That's like a joke and
2 jokes, maybe 3. So I did a show in LA the last time I was there. I remember I told you about Potluck, where you show up on a Monday at 4 p.m. and you do a big sign up sheet. At the same time, so Potluck happens in the original room. In the main room, there's a show called Kill Tony. It's a podcast recording. Yeah. And it's hosted by Tony Hinchcliffe. And they usually have a rotating guest. And then it's got Brian Redband, who used to be Joe Rogan's sidekick on his original podcast, right? So basically it's Tony Hinchcliffe and Brian Redband run it. And then they have a live band that introduces the next comic. And it's a bucket show. They have a bucket where they pick a name and you have 1 minute to impress them. And if you don't impress them, they're going to roast you on stage.
They shoot you.
They will absolutely roast you on stage. And so I actually,
I've heard about that. That sounds brutal.
And it's brutal. There are people who are brutal on that show. They're awful. And it makes you want to go like, just put me up on stage. I'll do so much better than that guy. Or people with like weird people who can go up on stage for that. And every time I've been in LA, I've signed up for it, never got on, never got picked. And then I found out that it's definitely a pruned list. So even though you sign up, it's not a true bucket show. It's not truly random. Certain people's names could get pruned out. They kind of have an idea who they want, and you have to know people on how to get your name in that bucket, which I ended up doing at the end, making sure I got my name in that bucket. And sure enough, I got picked on one night and I got thrown up on stage. And the guest that time was Dom Irrera. Who does not pull punches. Like he's hilarious. He's a legend, but he's very brutal.
You go for the jugular.
Yeah. And I did my material, my usual, I think jokes that I had done in Ottawa many times, and they did very well. But I couldn't really quite fit it in a minute. Like I really couldn't finish. I did one joke and then I was trying to set up for the next one. I just couldn't do it. And so I knew that the key to the show had nothing to do with the jokes you did on stage. Like if you did well, you did well, but it was really about your persona after, because they're going to talk to you and they're going to find out who you are, and they're going to try to roast you or nitpick you or praise you.
Your reaction. Yeah.
They want to see who you are. And I found the best success you had on that podcast, because I've listened to it 100 times, is to just be honest with them. Don't try to pretend to be something you're not, or try to roast them when you can. Yeah. And like be confident in who you are. And sure enough, I did very well afterwards. I assume I ended up just sort of like talking pretty real with them, and they ended up coming to chat with me afterwards. But the key there to me was that was all hosted on the main room. That was on the main room. I got up on stage at the main room. If you look on my Facebook, on my picture, that's me standing on stage at the main room. With Dom Irrera and Tony Hinchcliffe and the whole gang back there doing the Kill Tony show. And that was really in front of a crowd of about 150 people. And it was just incredible. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. But I felt, but it was super fun, super, super fun. I would definitely go back and do it again. And it's definitely, it was an experience.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That was incredible. That just sounded... What an experience that must have been for you.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I had no idea that you had done all of this.
No.
I had no idea. I had no idea you had done all of this stuff. That's amazing. And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like my mind is blown, because I'm like, that is so cool. That's something like I'd love to be able to do.
There's nothing stopping. Well, I mean, once, COVID and all that.
Yeah. COVID.
Yeah. But really, you got to think about what drove this. And I think you can relate to me on this one, Simone, is when all this happened, when I first started comedy, I was married. I had one kid. And as I moved from Vancouver back to Ottawa, I started getting in touch with friends that I knew that were in the comedy scene. And an old friend of mine, Karen McDonald, good old friend of mine. We were childhood friends. I asked her, how do I get on stage? And so she set me up to get up on stage at Yucks for an open mic for the new talent showcase. And that was my introduction. And she introduced me to a lot of the comics then. And that was my introduction to the Ottawa scene. And again, I was still very green. Like I was not a very good comic at all. But these, all of them knew me as the comic from Vancouver, so they thought I was big, and I was like, I'm not big. Like, I'm a horrible comic. Like, you're not gonna think I'm funny at all. But I'll do what I can. Like, I'll try to, be good. And where am I going with this? Oh yeah. So I got introduced by Karen and did all that stuff. And I was still married, but I couldn't just perform anytime I wanted to. Marriage is weird in that sense. You've got controlling marriages and all that stuff, and
responsibilities, and
exactly. Got divorced. I think it's very public. I've chatted about it on stage and talked about what's really happened there. And I felt that was a very much a life-changing event for me. And so it was probably around the same time I was going through kind of, I think, a midlife crisis. And so all of a sudden I'm going through all the stresses of everything, and I can finally have the freedom and everything I can do to go do as much comedy as I want, as long as it's not when I'm have my custody of my kids. So I still share 50-50 custody of both my kids. On the weeks I have off, basically anytime I was free, I was doing comedy. I would go to an open mic, I would go to the club. That's why I got the job working at the club, because I had the free time, and I said, I want to be around it. I just want to be absorbed by it. And then eventually I realized I need to get out of town. I want to get out of Ottawa. I want to just leave and go on a vacation, but I don't see myself going to some all-inclusive in Mexico.
Okay, yeah.
Just to be around some Quebecers or whatever. Like, it just does not seem appealing to me at all. And then so I said, what would it take? And I just kind of got the idea in my head, what would happen if I went to LA? And what would that cost? And I had a fair amount of air miles collected. So I ended up just saying, it's not actually that expensive. I can go stay in a really shitty Airbnb, but I'm not staying there. I'm going to be pretty much getting drunk and passing out
most of the day.
Exactly. And so I saved up and I went, and it was really more along the lines of me taking ownership of who I was and knowing that, am I really a comic, is really what it was. It was me thinking, like, do I feel like a comic? If I go to the Mecca of comedy and be around comics, can I feel like a comedian? And sure enough, I felt like a comedian. That's how I knew. That's how I knew I was like, this is definitely in me, and it will never leave me. I will always do comedy till the day I die. I might not be the greatest comic all the time, but it's in me. And I think most of us here in Ottawa, especially comedians, feel that passion. There are guys that, that will be comedians to a fault, like Trevor Thompson, will always be a comedian. No matter how much it pulls him out, he'll come back in and he falls in love with the comedy again. And he's meant to do this as much as I am as well. And as much as many of us are. Once you hit that bug, there's no quitting.
Oh yeah. There's no. Yeah. It's in my system forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cause I got into it was like a turning point sort of thing with me too.
Yeah.
Where it was like my mom had passed away the year before, or almost going up to a year before. I had just moved here to Ottawa. A long-term relationship had ended. My best friend passed away. It was just a whole lot of stuff.
Same.
I cut my hair off and everything. And I was like, okay, I need to do something better than like assaulting my hair, And I was like, this, because it kept coming up for like decades. It would keep coming up, and I'd be like, I can't. I'm too scared. I'm too scared.
Same.
And then I was like,
I
nothing
knew
scares me anymore. Yeah.
I knew when I was 14 that I wanted.
Yeah, I knew when I was 15. Yeah, and
it
was like 40 years later.
Yeah, it took me forever.
Yeah, it took me a long, long time, because I was like, I can't do it. I can't do that.
No.
But like I absorbed it like every way I could. Like I watched it, I read about it, I studied it. It's like I knew it, and it was like, but I can't do it. I can't do it. Like, what are you talking about? I can't do that.
I felt what messed with me the most with comedy was that I always felt it was unattainable, because I felt like what they did was magic. Because I thought comedy is really all about this idea that you are standing up on stage and you're talking, and you think they're coming up with it on the fly. It's that illusion that they just came up with it then. And some people still believe that. I've seen people at clubs who still think that people go up on stage and they're just talking.
They just talk off the top of their head.
Off the top of their heads. We're here to make you laugh, and they don't realize that it takes like years of practice, and you have material.
And how much time it takes to come up with that 6-minute bit.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
like how the hours and hours or weeks
The
and
writing
months.
and the weaning
Yes.
and the whittling down of the fat and changing one word or changing the instance of another word or whatever.
Exactly.
And then maybe inflection on one word. They don't know. But I always thought it was like they were coming off at the top of their head. And so I said that was completely unattainable. I'm not that funny. I could probably write something that would be funny, but I have no idea what the mechanism of it is. And it really wasn't until podcasts that and that when I started listening to podcasts and hearing comedians talk shop about comedy that I realized, oh, there's no magic sauce here.
Yeah.
These guys are just writing material, going on stage, and then doing it. And then I was like, oh, this is definitely something I can do. And so that's why I said, you know what, I'll do it. I'm going to give it a shot. And that's why I was serious about it after that.
Wow. Because I think for me, when I look at it as like, you know, the movie The Wizard of Oz, when at the end when they pull open the curtain and the guy's like doing all, like that. It was like that was my moment. And I was, because the thing is, that I knew it wasn't as easy as it looked.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
knew that they like the pros, the really good ones, made it look easy. So I knew that there was work involved. But like when I was like, oh, was actually, I think I was dating my ex-husband, and we liked to go to comedy shows, and we had gone to see this comic. I can't even remember his name. And so the first time we saw him, we were dying. Like, he was so funny. This was in Montreal. And then I saw in the paper that he was coming back, and it was like
Okay.
maybe 3 months later. And we're like, oh yeah, let's go, let's get tickets. And we went back, and he did the same stuff. And we were like, you know? And I was
Yeah.
like, at that moment, I was like, oh. And I remember my ex was like, how come he did the same stuff? Like, I thought he was going to do something new, sort of thing. And I was like, no, no, no. If we saw him next year, he might have something new. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we saw him only like 2 or 3 months. Yeah. And it was at that moment I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I think for me, a large part was I go see comics live in like a big theater venue. So like pretty big name comics. And then their Netflix or HBO special would show up later. And pretty much most of the jokes they did that night happens to be in the special, completely different. And that's when you realize, oh, these guys are working a tour of material. And
yeah, they were testing on me.
That's right.
Exactly.
And so that's where they're making their bread and butter at the end of the day is testing that material. And so yeah, and I felt like what really changed is when I started learning how to write a joke, about joke writing and what it takes to write a joke, and what you know, like how do you structure it, when you start learning the idea of a tag or a, you know, like a setup, punchline setup, and then a callback, and then, you know, like all these other terms that us comics,
the technical aspect of
the technical, I really love that because I love language. And so knowing how that works, it really changed my perspective when I go see a comedy show, because I would see a comedian perform.
Yeah.
And so there's the aspect of the words being said, and then there's the aspect of how it's being performed and the presentation of it, and the physicality or how the inflection is, the timing of that. And so I got to see that from a comics perspective all of a sudden, no longer.
Yeah, that's what's happening with me now. But
Yeah.
before, it was like I admired it, and I knew there was some sort of system, but I didn't know what it was called.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I knew what a punchline was, but I didn't know a setup. I didn't know like the rule of 3. I didn't know the terms for all of these things that I was seeing, you know, until I took the course and I learned the mechanics of it, you know.
Yeah.
And
the more just like the more you hear it, the more you really appreciate good comedy.
Exactly.
Because I think a lot of people their mediocre comedy is palatable to them. Let's be honest, right? You can go see a mediocre comedian, or some people are fed this sort of very steady diet of Netflix comedy specials, and they think they're going to go to a comedy club and see that caliber for an hour, which they're not, right? We all know that. You're not going to show up on a Tuesday, Wednesday at Yucks and think that you're going to see, you know, Bill Burr style comedy.
Dave Chappelle,
right. That's not going to happen. But most people who go to a comedy show, they really only want to have a good time. They want to sit in an audience, and just the fact that live comedy is, and that's what I get about this whole COVID thing, is the live comedy, sitting in an audience and being surrounded by people laughing in close quarters in a dark room with a perfect stage and the whole setup. There's nothing better than that. You can't beat that. And so you could have mediocre, as long as the jokes are funny enough, you could kill. And then when you can transcend that beyond and actually make it really good, that's when you become sort of like a very notable comic. But I'm nowhere near that. But I've seen progressions where I've seen people go from really low level open mics to mid-level perfect openers who do great solid sets, to transcending that to being able to be a very strong headliner, right? A very strong person who can tour. We've had great comics come out of Ottawa, let's be honest. So it's been great to see Kyle Brownrigg's rise, and Sophie Buttle, and all these great comics are doing really good for themselves right now. But seeing them go from what they were to now has been fantastic to see, and that's what I love about the craft. That's what I love about sitting in the back of the room and seeing a comic and appreciating it for what it is, beyond just an audience member. We're no longer civilians. We're not
civilians anymore.
Not civilians anymore. We are comics.
Exactly. We are, exactly. And I think we have like a deeper appreciation for it, just because we understand the process. We understand how difficult it can be at times. And that's why we love it so much. And that's why, like, when you see someone like kill on stage, like, it's so uplifting. Like,
I love that.
If I'm in a crowd and I'm seeing someone just kill it, it's the best feeling. The best feeling. There's
so many great comics that I've gotten to know and love, and I've seen their act 100 times. It's no joke. I've seen Andrew Wambault and Ben Hagel and all these guys perform the same act for years and years and years now. And I love them. They're great, but there's nothing, I sit in the back of the audience. I root for them. I want them to do well. I love that feeling of seeing, I know what's coming. I know the joke. I know their act.
And I hope everyone gets it. That's the thing.
Exactly. And I want to see, I want to see Mike Bombay drop that joke about, shooting it at the boards or whatever, like missing the net or whatever he has. That's a great freaking punchline, a great joke. I want to see that kill for every audience member, and I want them to get it. You know what I mean? And so that's I think that's the thing with a community and your comedian, is when you really get to support your comedians, is to really sort of root for them and stand in the back lines and the sidelines and say, hey man, that was a great show.
That was awesome. You did well. No, and that's what I like about our community. Like, the camaraderie is really good. Like, if someone does well, if I'm at a show and someone does well, I'm telling them, like, you did really well. That was fantastic.
I love that.
I love that. And it's just it's a comfort. It's comfortable. Like, it's what's the word? It's not, I can't think of the right word, but it's a good feeling.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling.
It's redeeming, and it's very sort of, you feel like you are welcomed. It's a welcoming.
Yes. And you feel like part of the community. Because people want you to do well. Because I know I've been at yucks where somebody I've never seen before goes up on stage, and I'm like, I can't wait to hear what they're going to say. And if they do really well, it's like, it's awesome. Like, after the show, it'd be like, you were really good. You know, I really enjoyed your stuff, sort of thing. Like, I love that.
I've been surprised by so many people over the years. I've seen early guys, like guys who are really good now, start out. I remember seeing one of Jeff Davis's first ever sets. I've seen Abdullah Usman's really early sets.
So good.
And I've seen them grow so well, and it's been so great to see. Peter Saran, I've seen really early sets, and these are, I consider them my colleagues and my friends, right? And to see them grow what they are today is so cool. I love that. I've seen. I remember the first time I ever met Jeff Davis. The first thing I ever said to him, and I think it was at the basement of the Clock Tower. when I think it was one of the early shows that Spence was running, and he did a set, and it was really good. I liked it, and I think I recognized how good a joke writer he was, but he just didn't have the confidence to say it as well on stage. But I could tell, however he wrote that was fantastic. Like, that is where you want to be. And I told him, I said, you're a great joke writer, man. Like, you know, when you get your confidence on stage, you're gonna kill. And I saw it coming a long time ago, and he's since really sort of grown into himself, and got away from the fat jokes, which is great, and moved into really smart, intelligent, well-written comedy.
Yeah, and he can roast. He can roast. Oh my god.
Oh yes.
Like a
He
brilliant roaster.
Lovely. I wish I had that skill, man. That's another thing. I can't roast. I can't be mean. I really can't be mean against people, but
me either. I can't be mean.
No. And
I'd be like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm too nice. I don't know, I guess.
Same.
Yeah.
Same, I can't do it. I don't have it in me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, Mike, this was amazing.
It's a great interview, Simone. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
For joining me today. Like, this was just like, this was an incredible conversation and fascinating, and I knew nothing of it. I didn't know that you had these cool comedy experiences, and that was fantastic. Do you want to tell, like, our listeners and our viewers, like, do you have anything upcoming or anything that you want to let the viewers and listeners know about?
So far, nothing so far. What's stopping me right now, for the most part, is I live on the Quebec side, and there is a curfew. So if I was to go out into Ottawa to do a show, you know, I being back in time would kind of suck. I also have two kids that are in school, so I also don't want to be that guy who brings the risk into a comedy club. So I'm really respecting, you know, and also I don't do this for a living. So to me, you know, exactly. So to me, trying to see if I can get a weekend spot, to me is just maybe taking the spot away from a comic who's probably earned it more and it relies more on the money for that aspect. So, you know, I want to see those guys get their spots. So I'm kind of stepping aside for that, and I'm okay with that. I'll come back into it most likely next month, or this coming month in March. I'm trying to see if I can book some spots, and just sort of get my new material. I've since this whole COVID's been down again, lockdown 3, I've written more new material, and I'm writing more stuff. So I'm looking forward to trying out that new stuff in an open mic. I feel more comfortable in the clubs. So I feel more comfortable performing at Yucks and Absolute right now, which is since this lockdown, it's really all I've performed. The only other venue I've done aside from that has been Comedy at Eddie's, which have been fantastic. You know, Janelle's been great to host me at least once, and I hope she'll have me back, because I think that's a great venue.
It is.
Yeah. But aside from that, no, I'm not doing anything so far. I'm just kind of doing my best to keep sane and keep happy and keep safe. And that's it for now. And once things open back up, once I get my arm with that fancy vaccine that everyone wants, I'll be back on the scene after that. And I'll still, I could see the appeal of Zoom shows. It's not for me. Okay. If I'm going to make a choice, it's going to be live comedy. I'm going to wait for live comedy to come back and do that, because that's what I prefer. And that's really my passion. So I think that's what I'm going to continue with. So.
Okay. Well, you know what? Anytime you want to come back,
I would love to.
You let me know.
Yep.
And I'll have you on, because this was fantastic.
Thank you, Simone.
And I thank you for your time, and this was great. So I really appreciate your time and you coming to speak to me today.
Thank you very much, Simone, and have yourself a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.